Okay, excuse me. The May 11th meeting of Ascension Parish Planning and Zoning Commission, the Planning Commission is called to order. And I'd like to ask Stacy if she'd call the roll, please.
I don't have the names. Mark Vila, Dwayne Bailey, Nicholas Miller,
Max Nassau.
Max Nazar, Wade Scheck-Snyder, Randy Kluwat, and Todd Warnadoe, not here.
So we do have a quorum. I'd like to ask Randy if he'd lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Chairman's introduction of staff. So the staff members we have here with us today are
Stacy Webb, Recording Secretary for the Planning Commission.
Spencer Long, Parish Attorney.
Eric Poche, Parish Planner.
Lance Brock, Zoning Official.
Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda is Chairman's comments, and I do have a couple of things to say. One of those is that, we've had an easy meeting last month. We should have a fairly easy meeting this month, but as we know, as the moratorium is lifted and things go forward, we're going to begin to have a much more active agenda and participation, both from the commission and from the public. I want to again reiterate what I said last month, and that is we always want to maintain decorum in our meetings and be professional in how we proceed. Most boards and commissions and entities conduct their meetings by Robert's Rules of Order. This commission in 2017 adopted Robert's Rules of Order as the methodology by which we would conduct our meetings. That's still in effect. In association with Robert's Rules, most bodies also adopt bylaws which further clarify how meetings are conducted from the public as well as from the commission side. So with that being said, I understand that there were some bylaws that were in place some years ago for the Ascension Parish Planning Commission. I'd like to see us adopt some bylaws, current bylaws. So what I'm going to do as chairman at this point is I'm going to create a commission, a committee, not a commission, to work with the planning staff, Mr. Fournier, to craft some modern bylaws and to have those assembled by our next meeting and present those to the commission for adoption. Again, those would be the rules by which we conduct our meetings beyond Robert's Rules of Order. So on that committee, I'd like for Nick to be the chairman and to work with Wade Scheck-Snyder and Todd Warnadoe. They bring a certain amount of institutional knowledge to the commission, having been involved with some of the inner workings over the years. So with that, I can move on to the next item, which is public comment on any agenda item. I'd like to remind those members of the public that will be commenting that your comments are to be directed toward agenda items. Issues that are not on the agenda are not up for conversation at this time. So with that being said, I like to use a little hammer. The public comment period is open. Does anyone have any comments that they'd like to make on an agenda item? If so, just rise, state your name, address, which agenda item you'd like to speak on, and we'll, I think it's 3 minutes. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I prefer it.
Okay. I just had a few questions. I don't know about the cell phone tower or the tower on
Yes.
Cannon Road.
Could you please give us your name and your
Oh,
address?
Jerry Broussard. Yeah, I live on 43285 Azalea Lane, Leo Stevens Road, which
Okay.
is where the tower was going.
Okay.
I just didn't know nothing about it, so I thought this would be the place to come and ask a few questions. If anybody here would know, it's probably they're putting a cell tower right in my front yard, which is 15 foot off the property line. I don't even know how tall this tower is. It's about 100 foot from my bedroom. My concerns is if it was to fall, it would hit my house. Is that something to be concerned about? Most people would say no. I sleep in that bedroom. I think yeah. I think everybody on this council would probably have that. I cut trees down around my house because when the hurricanes come through, I don't want to hit my house. Well, they're putting this up. So some of the people around my house are worried about their devaluing their property. I'm not worried about that. I'm planning on staying there the rest of my life. That's the other reason.
Somebody else's problem.
Yeah, my kids' problem when they get ready to sell it. But my point being is, I was wondering how tall is this tower? It's I can tell you from the center of the tower to my bedroom's 100 foot. So, if it's over 100 foot, I'm totally against it. I'm not against them moving it on the property. It can be against my property just further to the back. There's plenty of property to move it. I'm
Okay,
just
sir.
was wondering.
What I'd like to do is take your comments that you've just given us,
Okay,
and then that item is going to come up on the agenda,
okay.
But the zoning meeting,
which
that's
is
the following
the
meeting
meeting right after this one.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
sir.
Never
At that
been to
point
one of
in-
these, so I really didn't know how this worked, so, yeah.
So,
so I-
yes, sir, at that point in time, we'll have a little more dialogue, provide more information, but we do appreciate your comments.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
sir.
you very much.
We won't, I wrote your name down, I won't forget you. Okay. All right, so, Mr. Broussard, correct? Yes. Yes, sir. Okay, Stacy, do we have anyone else signed up for public comments?
No.
Okay. Public comment period is closed. So with that, our next agenda item is a staff report, then it's a presentation. Mr. Fournier, please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, and the general public. Last year, Parish Council placed a moratorium on the subdivision of property until such time that we would update and revise certain portions of our Unified Land Development Code. Revisions were made to the subdivision code and the drainage code and were recently approved by the Parish Council. Those changes were considered the most urgent, but a complete rewrite of our ordinance will be conducted in the next year, including the zoning ordinance. Right? So the parish has contracted the national planning firm, Kindred Keys Collaborative, to assist in the revision. Tonight, Mr. Brian Mabry of KKC will provide an overview of the efforts to date and discuss the work effort to come in the next year. Brian will join us via Zoom and is available to answer questions after his presentation. Right? Brian, please begin.
Okay. Thank you, Jerome, and thank you, commissioners, for having me virtually this evening to give you a rather quick, I think, presentation just to reacquaint you or acquaint for the first time some of the new members with this project. As I said, or as Jerome said, I'm Brian Mabry with Kindred Keys Collaborative. We are the project lead on this, on updating your code. On the screen is our team, which consists of my boss and our CEO, Brett Keast. And then I have assistants from the two folks next to me at the bottom, Ashley Woolsey and Janice Burrell. We are teaming with a sub-consulting firm, Tischler Bice. They are national experts on infrastructure finance or infrastructure and fiscal analysis, and they are helping with some topics that are sort of tangentially related to the actual main part of the project, which is, again, the updating of the actual words and images and tables that are in your land development code. So, of course, overseeing the whole thing really is you all as the Planning Commission and also the Parish Council as well. But on the staff side, overseeing this project is, of course, Jerome and Ricky. And I came to the parish 2 weeks ago and in person and met with Jerome and Ricky and other staff members, had a tour of the parish. I took over this project from another person who has changed jobs. And so I am getting up to speed and getting in the groove of this project. And I'm, again, happy to be talking to you all. This is a timeline of the project, where we've been, where we are, and what lies ahead. Began in August of 2021 with some kickoff activities and orientation. We produced a diagnostic report that points out some things that we thought should change in your existing regulations. And those are based on several things, based on some of those kickoff activities that I mentioned, where we interviewed stakeholders and talked with staff and looked through your existing regulations and sort of from a national best practices perspective provided things that we thought could improve on the document. But there were also some important updates that couldn't wait until when this project is scheduled to end, which is spring of next year. And those have gone through the proper channels and ultimately were adopted, as Jerome mentioned, by the Parish Council a couple of weeks ago. And those mainly have to do with drainage and streets and a few other items that I'll get into in the next few slides. So that's the most recent sort of big milestone in this project that has been accomplished. And now we're moving into that next piece that says iterative code drafting, where we will be taking at not quite as urgent of a pace as we had with the priority code updates, taking your existing regulations and proposing amendments to them on a wide variety of topics. And those will be reviewed internally by parish staff, and then we will take those comments and edits into account and improve on the document. Then they will be presented to the more general public, including you all, as pieces of this update to your regulations. And of course, again, eventually in spring of next year, these changes to your existing regulations would go through the public hearing process with you and with the Parish Council for eventual adoption. As we began this project, we kind of were thinking in terms of growth management, and that's sort of this happy medium here in the middle between two extremes. On the left, you have no growth, where the parish would have such strict regulations, development regulations, that really hardly anything would get built as far as subdivisions or new businesses, shopping centers. But that has, obviously, as you can tell, its problems. It can be unrealistic. It can be difficult for parish staff to manage, just in terms of always having to say no all the time to everything that gets brought forward, and you all needing to recommend or say no to folks, and no one really enjoys doing that much of the time. And then it can also have negative economic impacts on the parish's economy. If you're not getting improvements to land, then you're losing out on a variety of benefits that go along with that. On the other extreme is unchecked growth, where there is just the Wild West and there's no regulations or very little regulations, so that subdivisions and other kinds of growth in the parish just out of control. And that has its problems as well, with traffic problems and drainage issues, which happen to be, as I said, the two biggest topics of those interim updates I mentioned. Impacts on the budget, where without a control growth, and can also it can be just as politically unpopular as the no growth scenario. So trying to strike a balance and a happy medium in between those two extremes where growth is responsible fiscally and environmentally. It's sustainable where we're meeting our needs of today without sacrificing the needs of our future, children and grandchildren, and being fiscally responsible as well. And there's several characteristics there of growth management and of that sort of happy medium where growth is managed and community character and assets are protected, and also having economic benefits that can go along with that as well. From the beginning of this project and throughout the project, we will have public engagement, and we will be gauging the opinions of the general public, of specific stakeholders, of you all, and of the parish council and of parish staff. This comes in several different forms. An advisory committee that you see there at the top that's composed of more people who are looking at our work from a more policy perspective, a bigger picture perspective, and then a technical advisory committee that is composed of people who more kind of use the regulations every day, whether it's engineers or designers, landscape architects, surveyors, builders, people who are really down in the weeds on your regulations would be part of that group. We've done stakeholder interviews, which kind of consists of groups of people, like I just mentioned, of surveyors or engineers or builders, and getting their thoughts on what could be improved in your existing regulations. There will be and have been updates to the groups you see listed in that fourth bullet, the parish council, you all, the board of adjustment. And there also will be a project website that will keep people up to date on scheduling and where we are in this process. And eventually, when it's ready, these drafts of our proposed changes to your existing regulations will be posted on the website as well. As we draft, we draft our regulations in a certain platform called Encode Plus that you might hear get mentioned a lot between now and adoption. Basically, we'll be doing that. Staff will be able to review our work as we're going. It's not like a Word document where we have to trade the document back and forth over email and try to be sure we're using the most up-to-date version. Whatever we're looking at and whatever staff looking at is the most up-to-date version. So we're going to be working on these changes in two different modules, modules 1 and 2. That first module is typically standards. So like if there are any landscaping or buffering standards, use standards, what land uses are allowed in what zoning districts, dimensional standards. So that's, lot size, lot width, building height. That's all covered in module 1. Module 2 is more process related, so the procedures that need to happen in order to receive a change in zoning or variance or some other things like that. Enforcement, non-conforming uses or grandfathering is also addressed in Module 2. Then we'll eventually put those two modules together into a consolidated draft that will be able to be reviewed. And then, of course, as I've said, code adoption in the end. That final document of your Unified Land Development Code will be on a very user-friendly platform. Again, Encode Plus, there you can see in the lower right an image from another code after it's been adopted where there's lots of tables and visual items to help explain the regulations. It's still a legal document and we have to maintain its legal defensibility, but we can also make it more easy for an average layperson to understand using some of these techniques. So getting into some of these updates that happened, these interim updates that were approved a couple of weeks ago, they were done in 2 batches. This first batch is mostly related to sort of, I guess I would say roads and access and then some miscellaneous items. And then batch 2 is more about drainage. So there were changes related to fencing, making sure that fences are kept out of drainage servitudes, and then also requiring a permit for certain fences on certain properties and in certain zoning districts. There procedurally for preliminary plats, a requirement for completeness review so that we're sure that staff is reviewing complete applications and staff has a 5-day window to notify the applicant that what's been submitted is complete. And if it's not, then there's a process for that to notify what needs to be provided in order to have a complete application. A very slight change to what's called large-scale developments, specifying that only applies to Pelican Point. There's going to be some projected new provisions that are going to sort of take the place of that. And Pelican Point is your only large-scale development, and so just kind of solidifying those regulations as only applying to that subdivision was the purpose of that change. Widening streets from the paved area for streets from 18 to 20 feet, and also having a requirement when there's a family split, like a small scale, sort of large lot, I guess, split in unsubdivided property among family members, that there be adequate access provided into 20 paved access provided 20 feet into the property. As far as access and connectivity, there's new standards that were part of these updates, requiring at least 2 points of access to for a subdivision with 20 lots or more, having 2 points of access out onto either an existing street that's on the perimeter of the subdivision or stubbed out to a future street, so that there's more than one way to get in and out of a larger subdivision. And there is the opportunity for the Planning Commission to modify that requirement on a case-by-case basis in case there's some unique situation that an applicant wants to bring forward to the Planning Commission and make a case that as to why they shouldn't have to provide 2 points of access. For servitudes, there's a requirement in the new update that servitudes remain free of fences and other obstructions that could prevent proper drainage. And then the only one of these that wasn't I guess, passed by the council and sort of deferred to their next couple of meetings was some changes to the traffic impact analysis provisions. You had a traffic impact analysis policy that has been converted into regulations. So think of it as a lot of shoulds become more shalls or musts, so that they have a little more regulatory teeth than just a policy. There's a provision in these traffic impact analysis language that an engineer who is contracted by the parish would be the one who conducts the traffic impact analysis studies for certain subdivisions. And these TIAs apply to changes in zoning when there's an expansion of an existing development and when there is access to state roads involved. However, single family access is exempt from providing a TIA. There's a traffic scoping meeting that was just sort of roughly referenced in the old policy that has been fleshed out more in the regulations. And then there's a list of mitigation measures or things that an applicant can do to a street or to an intersection that make it, make the traffic flow better and make it acceptable in terms of decreasing some of the negative impacts that could come with what's proposed to be done, whether it's a change in zoning or a new subdivision or whatever the case may be. Then we get into batch two. Again, these were more about drainage requirements. First one is that there is a prohibition now for open ditches on residential lots that are smaller than 1 acre in size, and, for drainage ditches that are in the rear. Those would then need to be handled underground as opposed to open ditches. There are definitions added that you see there, those 3 bulleted items: maximum extent practicable, open ditch, and parish engineer were added to the definitions section of the regulations. There is an attachment B drainage impact study procedure, which revised the design of drainage to go from requiring being able to handle a 25-year storm event to a 50-year storm event. So it became sort of more rigorous in the type of and the extent of storm that it can handle. And it also updated post-development standards so that 10% or more of the water has to be detained as compared to the pre-development conditions on the site. Continuing with the batch 2 updates, there is new requirements related to protection of existing watersheds. And this would apply to major residential and commercial subdivisions that exceed either 20 lots in the case of a residential subdivision or 20 acres, sorry, or 50 lots for those two types of subdivisions. And one of the main points of it was that hydrologically connected wetlands have to be preserved. And that's a term that's used by the Corps of Engineers where surface water and groundwater are connected together. So very significant wetlands that are both above ground and below ground. There are requirements that there can't be filling or draining of those areas, that only a certain amount, 40% in this case, can be mitigated for road crossings and utility crossings. And there was some debate in the council on that. The original percentage was 15%, so it was more restrictive, but the council lightened up on that up to 40% instead of the 15. And then finally, there is a buffer zone required around these wetlands as a protective measure to prevent, just human activities, pollution, things like that from interfering with the wetland. There were changes related to placement of fill on a residential lot, for example, where a subdivision is being built and it's sort of being evened out, and fill is being moved from one spot to another. There's a maximum fill of 48 inches, and then for individual lots, a clarification that the average can't exceed 36 inches on any individual lot. Many of these changes were sort of wordsmithing and clarification of what was sort of trying to be said in the existing regulations, but not quite clear. Continuing on with the drainage changes that happened in these interim updates, stormwater conveyance systems, all stormwater has to be conveyed to an on-site system or detention facility rather than being directed onto adjacent property and causing problems in that way. There were changes to the design criteria requiring a 50-year storm event design for proposed developments, 10% reduction in the outflow that would occur for a 10-year, 24-hour storm compared to the pre-development conditions. And then again, some more kind of wordsmithing, changing a term of maximum extent practicable or changing in as far as economically feasible to instead maximum extent practicable. There was a reference in the existing regulations to some changes from September 2019, which of course has already happened. And so that was removed as well. So those couple of slides I just did cover the interim changes that took place and were approved, except for that traffic impact analysis provisions by Parish Council a couple of weeks ago. The next two slides have to do with upcoming sort of recommendations that were part of a much larger presentation and critique that we provided that I'll just mention these highlights of. Reworking the zoning districts so that there is, and this is a big one, I think, reworking the zoning districts so that there are options for developing property, especially for residential subdivisions, so that the preservation of open space is incentivized, in terms of having more lots than what would have normally been created if the developer had not preserved the open space. So the benefits of open space preservation are multiple. They add to the rural character of an area or suburban character of an area even. They can be areas for some of the stuff we talked about earlier with drainage. So a lot of benefits to preserving open space, but it's not likely very often that a developer is going to just do that voluntarily unless that's part of their marketing for the property. So there has to be some incentives. And one of the main incentive really for doing that is for in exchange for more set aside permanently open space to give more units or more lots than what they would have originally been able to do if they hadn't done that open space preservation. And that's a lot to swallow. And we're going to, as this project goes forward, we're going to get more into that and provide some visuals. But for now, it's reworking those districts to encourage open space set-asides. Also having more housing types that allow, where desirable and where needed, more compact development. There's different kinds of housing types. I'm thinking especially of like multiplexes where there can be 3 units in a building that looks like just a large house. That can bring a little bit more density to an area without, and I know density can sometimes be a hard word, but bringing more of that to areas without having too much of an impact, so that again, it looks sort of like a large house rather than a typical triplex or quad or something like that. Infill development, incentivizing that. Infill development is taking an unused property. Let's say there's a street block and every lot is developed except for one in the middle and it's vacant for whatever reason, or maybe a set of lots in the middle. Having provisions that incentivize the development of those missing teeth there in the block face, so that some incentives can be, again, extra density to an extent, but also protecting the properties that are next door so they're not negatively impacted on it, or allowing different housing types than what would have normally be allowed if it weren't an infill property. And then adequate public facilities. This is really where our sub-consultants, Tischler Bice, will come in to help. And that it has to do with timing of growth so that it's physically, and maybe physically as well, but especially fiscally responsible, as opposed to more kind of expensive growth that's far flung and has a lot of expense to maintain the infrastructure because it's, reaching out and kind of creating sprawl. One more slide for these recommendations, I believe, and then I'm almost done. So establishing street connectivity standards, that was done a little bit already in these interim updates. So if the parish wants to go a step farther and do some more, then there's more we can do to require more connected developments that are both connected internally and also externally to the existing street network. Low impact development is important in that it is a way of sort of designing sites, especially with maybe parking areas, so that there are, as you can see in the image there, kind of planted areas, not necessarily landscaped, but areas with plants and other characteristics that can treat rainwater without it having to be sent down into the drainage system and eventually get treated somewhere. And so it takes some burden off of that infrastructure by more naturally treating stormwater as opposed to sending it through the system. There are some more miscellaneous recommendations that came out of this critique or this diagnostic, just coordinating water and sewer management, reorganizing the regulations so that they're in more of an intuitive order where there's standards grouped with standards and procedures with procedures instead of sort of mixing the two. Articulating all requirements without ambiguity and providing illustrations and graphics and tables. We try to be very clear and not use too much legalese, but instead more plain English when we are drafting regulations so that they're easily understandable. And then making your document easier to navigate. Again, with that Encode Plus platform, there's all kinds of user-friendly features that come into play once it's adopted that make it easier to go through the document. Some key dates coming up in the near future. We will be delivering a preliminary draft of Module 1 to parish staff on the week of July 25th. There will be a trip to present and discuss Module 1 in mid-August, and then at the end of August, we will take what we learned on that trip and revise Module 1, based on, again, what we learned on that trip. That concludes my part of this. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Before I open the floor to questions, I have one question myself, and that is on the batch 1 slide as it related to access. If you could go to that slide, please. Access and connectivity, the last bullet, Planning Commission may modify on case-by-case basis. Are there any listed criteria which should be considered for that case-by-case modification, or is it wide open?
Yes, there are. And there were, if I'm remembering the right one, staff might need to back me up on this. There were several criteria in the draft at one point before it went to parish council. And I believe this is the one that they reduced it down to basically kind of one catch-all criteria about public health and safety, and that if it's not damaging to the public safety, then that gives the Planning Commission the leeway to provide some relief on that. But there is some guidance in there. It's not just an open door to granting exceptions.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from the commissioners? Comments from staff?
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, that's the end of the presentation. We'll keep you informed. As Brian said earlier, we're going to be coming to you with changes to the ordinance as they occur. If there are procedural things like we discussed here, they're going to come to the Planning Commission. If there's an actual zoning change, they will come to the Zoning Commission, right? So we'll keep that in mind and keep you guys informed as we proceed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you, Brian.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda is the subdivision status report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, you will see in your packet the usual subdivision report giving status update on each one of the subdivisions currently under construction. The only change from last month was that Windermere Crossing at the bottom went from a pre-construction meeting. Now they are actively in construction. The widening to Cannon Road was initially set to begin about the middle of the latter part of April, and now they're thinking it's going to be closer to the end of May, first part of June. But I wanted to remind everyone that final plat for that subdivision will not come before you guys until that road is completed.
Good.
And if anybody has any questions about anything, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any question from the commissioners? Okay, none.
Thank you.
Okay, our next item is the the engineering staff report. As I understand it, there's no engineering report tonight. Very good. The minutes, I'd like to, a motion to approve the minutes by Mr. Scheck-Snyder. Second by Mr. Kluwer. Any discussion on the minutes? Anyone opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Next item would be consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Scheck-Snyder?
I need to abstain from any discussion on this part of the agenda.
Okay. So that'll be reflected in the minutes. So the consent agenda, any discussion, any motion on the consent agenda item?
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Yes, sir.
It's required that you read the consent agenda, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the item on the consent agenda is Shane Gotro, Lot 7A, address 12352 Gilbert LeBlanc Road in Gonzales. Okay, is there any motion to adopt consent agenda? Motion from Mr. Quillat. Second. I'm sorry, Nick. Let me check that last name. Miller. Second by Mr. Miller. Okay, our next item would be adjournment.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Scheck-Snyder, second by Mr. Miller. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Oh,